This afternoon, the Foreign Affairs Committee is holding an evidence session into the UK-EU reset inquiry. In this session, we're very pleased to be joined by ministers and officials from both the Cabinet Office and the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. I wonder if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves, please, for the record. Could I start with you?
Yes, so Nick Thomas-Symonds, and I am the Minister for European Union Relations in the Cabinet Office, and I've obviously been responsible for leading the negotiations and continue to be.
Thank you. Minister Doughty.
And Stephen Doughty, and I'm Minister of State for Europe at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, and I also cover the relationship with Gibraltar and a number of other related topics.
Lovely.
I'm Hermione Goff, and I'm the Director in the EU Directorate in the Cabinet Office.
My name is Nick Heath. I'm the Head of Department for the EU in the Foreign Office.
Thank you, thank you. We're slightly depleted in number because of the tube strike, but hopefully it'll be all right. I wondered if I could perhaps start off with some questions, and I think it's really just beginning with a fairly general one. We had the Prime Minister at the Liaison Committee. And I asked him about the reset, and I asked him about what had happened so far, and he said that it was done. But I think he did also say that there was more work to be done. But at the moment, if I was talking to a constituent on the doorstep, what would be the kind of the doorstep pitch as to what's happening and what has been achieved?
So the doorstep pitch to answer. And by the way, it's a pleasure to appear before you all today, and I'm sorry that you're not full complement, but I completely understand why, but it's great to come, and I'm very pleased, Chair, that you're taking the interest that you are with the inquiry that you're putting forward, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing your recommendations in due course, which I'm sure will be helpful for the phase that we are in at the moment on implementation. I'll reflect more generally in a moment. Just the doorstep pitch is around jobs, bills and borders. It is about a deal that we've struck on the 19th of May that we're now in the implementation phase of. It's going to be good for jobs, whether renewable jobs, for example, in the North Sea is a good example of that. Downward pressure on bills, both in terms of energy and in terms of the cost of food as a consequence of the sanitary and phytosanitary agreement, but also good for borders and making our borders more secure in terms of working together to tackle irregular migration, but also in terms of the additional tools that we have in terms of tackling crime, whether that is, for example, better criminal record sharing of third-party nationals or facial recognition, biometric data, to send a message that there's nowhere on the continent for us to hide. Now, just to take the point about the Prime Minister before the Liaison Committee, we've often talked about the reset. And I would certainly argue that the relationship is reset. And you would see that, and Stephen can speak in a moment to the bilateral relationships and that aspect of it. But there is no doubt that there is that collaborative, strong relationship that exists. And what I am about now is the vision of really building that new strategic partnership with the EU. And that will be about a new strategic partnership with mutual benefit in terms of jobs and investment on either side of the channel, but also around the other aspects too, particularly around law enforcement. So I believe the relationship has been reset. I believe the tone is different. I believe that we have that real constructive partnership working, which is so important and in our national interest. But it's also now about building that new strategic partnership that is rooted in a realistic, hard-headed assessment of international politics and our national interest in the mid-2020s, not going back to the battles of the past, but looking forward as to what is in our shared interest.
And I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but I will attempt to speak on behalf of the committee, and certainly our experience is that having met many people from across Europe, that the relationship does seem to be very warm. Still challenging, but it seems to be on a much better, more even keel than it has been in the recent past. Steve.
Chair, I might add to that, and again, thank you to the members of the committee for holding this inquiry. I think it's hugely important, and it's always a pleasure to be here alongside Nick, and I can genuinely say the way in which we work together between the two departments and collectively on those shared endeavours, I think is a testament to the strength of the working between the two departments and the shared vision there is across the government on this, and why it matters to the three issues that Nick mentioned, but also crucially to our security and defence. And obviously I've been particularly involved in the work around our security and defence partnership with the EU, but also in that wider reset. And I think it's important that while a lot of the focus rightly has been on that UK-EU relationship and what we achieved on the 19th of May, it's also in the bilateral relations and the improvement of those with many of our key partners. The new treaty with Germany, the new upgrade of our treaties with France, the work we're doing to a new treaty with Poland, the complete significant improvements in our relationship with Ireland and the wonderful summit we had. Even just last week, the Prime Minister, the President of the Spanish government visiting, I think, for the first time since 2017. I think those are very, very visual and tangible outcomes as a result of this reset. It's also about our relationships in the European political community, which obviously we led off with under this new government in the second week. The leadership that we've shown around things like the Coalition of the Willing on Ukraine with other European partners, our work in the Arctic, our work in the OSCE, in the Council of Europe. So this is a multi-pronged reset, and I always describe it as different strands in a muscle. These are all overlaying on each other: the UK-EU relationship, the relationship with the individual countries, and the bilateral work that we're doing. Those other bodies are groups like the GEF on our defence and security. These are all interlocking strands of a muscle, and when Britain strengthens those and when it uses them all together, our muscle is stronger, whether that's economically, whether that's in terms of our security and defence, whether that's in terms of what we're doing to try and bring down bills. So this is a collective endeavour. It's at the core of it, it's about that reset with the EU, but it's much, much bigger than that, and I've been engaged in much of that work. And just lastly, reflecting on the sort of spirit of this, I just came from attending the Gymnich meeting, the informal ministers meeting of foreign ministers with the EU, where ourselves, Norway, Iceland were also present, discussing the very, very present threats to European security, the work that we need to do together to stand in solidarity with Ukraine, to ramp up the economic pressure on Russia. And we are there now as a guest, but as a crucial partner, and also bringing that crucial perspective of the transatlantic alliance as well into our European relations, because of course NATO remains the bedrock of our security and defence. So I'm seeing that in a tangible way in the relationships and how they're playing out, and that is now delivering real tangible benefits for British people in all those areas that Nick mentioned, but also crucially in keeping this country safe.
I think we're going to be asking you more about a lot of the things that you've just raised, Minister. Can I just also just take you back to again what the Prime Minister said at liaison. I asked him what next. I mean, it's good to be, it's good to see what it is that we're doing now, but kind of what else are we going to do? And he told me that he would like to do more and more on medicines. There are other areas where I would like, or I think we could go further. I think many creative people who are crossing borders for their artistry, their music, or whatever it may be on a temporary basis, they are not going to find another country for any significant period of time, are still finding it too difficult to get in and out of the countries. I hope we can make some progress there. So it seems to be medicines and artists top at the Prime Minister's list. Do you have other things on your list that you would like to be doing next?
So let me just pick up a number of aspects of that. I think, first of all, it's really important that we have annual summits, because that will enable these issues to be raised, and they are those particular milestones that are going to drive progress. That's hugely important. And what the Prime Minister was talking about there are particular issues where we certainly want to make more progress. I mean, just to take the touring artists example, we do have an issue whereby there is a restriction on our touring artists. And I don't mean by that simply, we tend to think of this in terms of famous pop stars touring, but I'm actually thinking as well of orchestras, of choirs, of musicians that we will all know in our local communities who might want to go and perform across the EU and indeed in other parts of the world as well. And clearly we want to make that as easy as possible. The restriction is what's known as the 90 and 180 days rule at the moment, and it's because when you have a particular musical tour, and I know you've got a former Secretary of State for TCMS, you will know this very, very well, it isn't just about the particular artist going somewhere. They have a whole apparatus around them that also needs to be there to do the preparation. So that's certainly something we want to find a solution on. Clearly as well, alongside that, we want to implement what's been agreed. So the Security and Defence Partnership was signed on the day. It was signed on the 19th of May, and Stephen can talk to the operation.
We'll have questions
I'm sure you'll have questions about that. But other things like, for example, the SPS agreement, the Food and Drink Agreement, I've said about getting that into effect by 2027. I talk about early part of 2027 to implement it so we can actually see the benefit of it. And it is going to be hugely important. Just to give an example, something like an export health certificate, which costs £200 per consignment. So you're talking, you could have a lorry that is taking, whether it's meat or whatever it might be, that we can, when that's implemented, take away those significant costs that are going to be on businesses. That's a real priority. So it's implementation, but also then these other issues that we can feed in. And also we have our strategic dialogues as well. So we'll want to talk about things like mutual recognition of professional qualifications is another example. And indeed business mobility as well, which is something that businesses frequently raise when I speak to them.
So I think I think really what I'm doing is just trying to kind of keep our eye on the horizon. Sort of what else are we? Yep. This isn't going to be it. There is more to be done. There is more ambition. So Martin Donnelly completed the economic diplomacy review for the FCDO last year. What recommendations did he make to improve the UK's terms of trade with the EU, and has the government accepted them?
Martin Donnelly's review previously. Well, look, we were very clear as a government when we came in, and you'll be aware of this, Chair, that we weren't going to rejoin the EU. We were going to not rejoin the customs union or the single market, but that we were able to take the steps that Nick and the Prime Minister and colleagues have been able to do, and I think those are going to deliver very, very tangible benefits in the areas that he set out.
What he's set out is sort of things like alignment of EU rules on medicines, but chemicals as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, has the government accepted that we should be working on medicines and chemicals?
I think on this, our priority now is what we've agreed with the EU, and what we've agreed is across food and drink, and it will be there'll have to be legislation on that. So that is what the focus is at the moment. It is implementing what we have agreed. And just to say on that, we are taking a decision as a sovereign nation that we are a high standards jurisdiction. Mm-hmm. We are aligning with common high standards because we believe that is in our national economic interest to do it. Yeah. I should point out as well, Chair, that the way that is set up in the common understanding is making sure that there is firstly a rule shaping role for us. So that's discussions when regulations and directives are being formulated. But also, there will inevitably be disputes. Now, of course, you don't go into any trade arrangement with the objective of having a dispute. But if you have a trading relationship of over £800 billion a year, that's just an inevitable consequence of it. And so there will be an arbitration panel. It is true that questions that are exclusively about the interpretation of EU law go to the European Court of Justice, but they're referred back to the arbitration panel, and it is not binding on the panel in terms of the overall decision in the dispute, which I would suggest is a very pragmatic arrangement we are choosing to go into.
And Chair, going back to the first part.
I just wait, before we move on to anything else. I mean, since you've mentioned dynamic alignment, and obviously we do have questions on that, I think what I'll do is I'll bring in Sir John so that he can ask about that, and then we can move on.
That'll be fine.
Yeah.
Or do you want to do dynamic alignment?
Yeah, let's do that. That's what he was just talking about the. Is it all right?
Yeah, I was going to come to the borders.
Oh, okay.
Let's do borders because the Minister's already mentioned some aspects.
Yeah.
Minister, for many of our fellow citizens, their experience in the last few months has been when travelling to Europe on holiday, which obviously a huge number do visit European countries, and they have now to join a different queue to the EU nationals queue. They have to use, they have to have their passport stamped. Now, one of the consequences of the agreement, as we understand it, is that the EU has said that there is no requirement under EU law for them not to use gates. Can you say how many countries have now allowed UK nationals to use e-gates?
There's 50, and I'm quite happy on terms of the number of countries to write to the committee, but it's 50 passenger ports at the moment across Europe that have opened their e-gates to British travellers. Now, since the agreement of the 19th of May and since we had that clarification from the EU, I myself have been able to go and open e-gates to British nationals in particular parts of Europe. I've been to Prague, I've been to Sofia, just two examples of where I've been to do that. They clearly are a direct result of the agreement that we struck. The issue, of course, is that whilst that clarification, I think, is a real step forward and it's already had tangible benefits, it is still within the competence of member states as to when they open. So, for example, Germany has opened this in terms of regular travellers, for example. Germany is doing that as well. So there are ongoing discussions. I mean, Stephen can speak to some of the work that he's been doing from an FCDO point of view. But that work will obviously continue for precisely the reason, Sir John, that you've suggested, which is that we want the best possible experience for travellers. And it works both ways, by the way. We want really good experiences for British people going overseas, but also as well when either our British travellers are returning or indeed we are welcoming visitors here for tourism and many other matters as well. But I don't know, Stephen, if you want to speak about
just to add, since that statement that clarified things was made, we've been following up with every single country we can. It's certainly been a core part of all of my conversations with bilateral partners. So just recently I've been discussing it with the Netherlands, with Poland, with Greece. When the UK-Germany treaty was signed on the 17th of July, Germany agreed it would grant e-gate access to registered British travellers via a registration scheme. I know, as Nick's mentioned, he's been in a number of locations. Prague Airport's also trialling e-gates access for British passport holders. Portugal's recently expanded its e-gates access to Faro, Funchal and Porto. Lisbon already offered it. Estonia's going to offer once new infrastructure is in place. So, I can go through the full list, but essentially this is now a core part of conversations we're having with each place. Obviously, it's up to each individual member state about how they do this and get the right technical procedures in place, and you rapidly get into some very, very technical conversations, which we then put officials together to share, and actually sharing the experience of the locations that have moved forward faster already do it. So this is an ongoing piece of work, and actually it touches to that wider question that you asked, Chair, which is about yes, the reset has happened, but this is now about delivery and implementation, and that's crucial across a range of things, not just e-gates, but the Gibraltar Agreement, getting the Poland Treaty done, all of these things, what we're doing on migration, and we're going to be hosting the Berlin process on the Western Balkans, working alongside EU partners. So there are all these things over the next few months that are going to help implement those key changes that we've made.
Sofia and Estonia are great, but for most British holidaymakers, Spain, Italy, Greece and France are going to be the priorities. Now, we also have coming into effect the new entry-exit system which the EU is introducing. Can you say that by the sort of summer holiday period next year, you would hope that the vast majority of British tourists will be able to enter EU countries without having to go through a separate channel and without having to have their passport stamped?
So obviously it's within the competence of the member states that as to the decisions they take. So obviously I couldn't guarantee something that's outside my control, obviously. But what I can say is that, whether it's at FCDO, whether it's, the work I do at the Cabinet Office, we will continue, obviously, to press for as many ports as we can, the easiest possible passage for British nationals who are going overseas. And just to say on Sofia, I'm not disagreeing with your point about where people visit, but
you're not supposed to go.
Indeed it is. I think I was given a figure when I was there of 400,000 British visitors a year, so I guess it will certainly help them on their visits to Sofia.
And just in relation to that interaction with the entry-exit system process, this is obviously something myself and Nick have been working very closely on with colleagues from the Home Office and others over many, many months to ensure that we understand what is happening in terms of readiness and implementation across ports of entry, particularly the high-pressure ones that you mentioned, Sir John. There are extensive conversations going on around that, and we've also looked at other places like northern Finland, where, of course, many people go for visits to Santa around Christmas. We fully understand where the pressure points are likely to be. The good news is that actually in France, Italy, Spain, at many points, they already offer e-gates access. I've been particularly interested in following up with Greece, and particularly the situations at some of the smaller airports on islands and elsewhere, and have even sort of visually looked at how the dynamics of that is going to work in different places. And so this is an ongoing conversation with them. It is tied up with that entry-exit system implementation and the flexibilities around it. But I would just want to say one other thing we've been doing, particularly through our posts, is also to ensure that Brits living abroad who are withdrawal agreement beneficiaries know how to sign up for the relevant residence permits and others if they haven't already done that, to ensure that can enable quicker access, particularly in locations like Spain and elsewhere, and ensuring, and we've been putting out a lot of information over recent weeks and months to ensure that British citizens understand what these changes are going to mean and that they can prepare and be ready for them.
And finally, Minister, you're absolutely right, but I spent a lot of my time listening to complaints from touring artists about the difficulties they face. You're also correct that for orchestras and big bands like Iron Maiden, who have a sort of fleet of trucks, is not just the admission of the performers, it's all the kit that they have to carry, often from different countries. They may be visiting 5-6 countries and they need a carnet for each one. Can you just give us a quick update on how far you've got to remove those obstacles?
So, firstly, it was a manifesto commitment for us, so it is particularly crucial for us, a huge priority for us. What we had in the Common Understanding was a recognition of the importance of this issue going forward and enabling us to continue to push this for the annual summit. We haven't set a date for the annual summit in 2026 yet, but certainly this is something we will want to press. There are conversations ongoing, not just me as the lead negotiator sits at the centre of the government, but obviously at DCMS as well in particular. And I know I think the minister has changed over the weekend, but a couple of changes over the weekend, Sir John. But the previous minister, and indeed I know from speaking on the weekend, it is a priority for them to continue. So as to progress, I guess the proof will be in the pudding, as they say. But it's certainly a priority for us, and I think it's a priority both because it is obviously economically important. We want to see whether it's orchestras or indeed bands actually having this opportunity in place around Europe. But I actually think it's an important part of our soft power as well, a really important part of our soft power, that we have the very best of the British cultural scene being showcased around Europe.
I think I'm going to move on. We've got to try and keep to time. Afra.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to take a moment to ask the ministers about the deal for UK fisheries as part of the UK-EU reset. I wanted to share 2 quotes from fishing industry leaders. The first is from the Scottish Fishermen's Federation CEO, Elspeth MacDonald, who said that the deal struck by this government regarding fishing was, and I quote, a really unfair and unbalanced arrangement. We, the Scottish Fishermen's Federation, believe there will be some advantages, but those advantages do not outweigh the costs of giving away free access to UK fishing waters for 12 years. Mike Cohen, who's the CEO of the National Federation of Fishermen's Organisations, said that annual fishing quota negotiations were, and again I quote, the best card Britain had in trying to get a fairer division of rights. He said that we had a card in those negotiations with the EU and we've given it to the other side. So my first question is simply this, and given that you have said that this deal is good for jobs, what's your message to the UK fishing industry?
Well, firstly, Elspeth and Mike are both extremely powerful advocates, as I know very well from my engagement. Scottish Salmon obviously take a different view. If you look at what Scottish Salmon said about the deal, they were in a very, very different position. Now, what I believe we have struck a deal that is very much in the interests of UK fishers. Let me just say why I think that is. I think, first of all, we've given long-term stability. I think 12 years is a period of stability. And what that means is a period when we can actually invest, both in coastal communities, but indeed in upgrading the fleet as well. That's why we've launched the Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund, which will invest £360 million over the next 12 years. But the other crucial point is this. If you look at the UK catch, around about 70% of it, very roughly, give or take, is exported to the EU market. that is just a reality. And what this deal does, it allows certain types of fish, so shellfish that's in particular types of water, for example, that couldn't be exported to the EU will once again be able to be exported to the EU again. But what it also does with our sanitary and phytosanitary agreements is obviously going to remove a lot of the red tape and barriers. So it's going to be easier for our fishers to export into what is, by some distance, the largest market. So I do believe we have struck a deal that is in the interest of fishers, and whether it's Elspeth, Mike, or indeed other very powerful industry representatives, my door is open. I am more than willing to work with them on how best we utilise this, and with DEFRA as well, on this £360 million of investment.
I mean, it's interesting that you mentioned Scottish salmon. Of course, that's mainly farmed, so that's not actually helping the fishermen and women. But you also talked about having the better kind of access to EU markets. So on that basis, I just wanted to share what the National Federation of Fishermen's Organisations has said. And they say that the Prime Minister and the EU have claimed that the SPS agreement will benefit the UK fishing industry in the form of boosted exports. And as you've said, they say, well, it might be possible, hypothetically speaking, for farmed shellfish and salmon exporters. But they make it clear that for the majority of the fishing community, the reality is, and I quote, very unlikely that any savings from reduced export costs will be passed down to the men and women who go to sea. And they go on to say that if the government has a plan to ensure that these costs are going to be passed down the supply chain, they're eager to hear it and they're happy to work with them on it. So perhaps you could tell me and those fishermen and women if you've got a plan and how they're going to benefit from the deal themselves.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, just to take issue with your first point, I mean, Scottish salmon is a hugely important UK export. Hugely important.
I think we're disputing
hugely important, and is recognised around the world. And I think that the deal delivering for Scottish salmon is obviously going to be great for that sector, but also for the UK economy as well. Now, with regard to your broad point, I think is, how is the benefit going to be passed down? I think is the basic challenge that you're putting to me.
Well, it's not just me, it's the UK fishing industry that's asking that.
Of course, and I've had regular dialogues with them about that. My answer to that is that firstly, of course we want to see wide benefits of the SPS agreement. Now at the moment, we have the outline that exists in the common understanding. We'll now negotiate a legal text, and we'll take that forward. But secondly, the Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund, that is real, £360 million directly, not just to coastal communities, important though that is, but directly to what we can do to upgrade the fleet as well, which obviously is going to be of direct benefit to our fishers around the country. I am determined that they see benefits. I know that DEFRA are as well. But and also, and listen, you're absolutely right to read out their views. They've expressed them to me as well, quite rightly. But also, and I think it was reflected in the final quotation you read, also always had a constructive relationship as well. And that will absolutely continue to be the case. And in terms of continuing to work with them on this implementation, or indeed with DEFRA ministers on the Fishing and Coastal Growth Fund, absolutely that will continue.
We wanted to move on and talk about the EU Security and Defence Partnership, and I think you were going to kick off, Alex.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Ministers. You both mentioned the UK-EU Security Partnership in the introduction. I think it is a very significant part of the EU reset. That has a number of dialogues embedded underneath it, Russia and Ukraine, the Western Balkans, the Indo-Pacific. I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about what you expect to achieve from those dialogues.
The good news is we've already started them, which is getting on to that, implementing. And in fact, I was delighted last week to host the European External Action Service in London to discuss the Western Balkans. And I think that was particularly important, given not only our historic engagements in the region, but also because we're going to be hosting that Berlin Process Summit coming up as well, and the crucial work that we're doing there, not only on peace and stability in the Western Balkans, but also crucially on tackling irregular migration and a number of other challenges, including including serious and organised crime and flows of material through to the UK and indeed EU countries. So this is a very timely moment to have this discussion. I'm going to be travelling to Brussels shortly to have important discussions with them on hybrid threats to the UK and EU. So the idea is that we pick those as four key areas where we want to see a greater understanding and cooperation between ourselves and the EU on some matters that I think affect all of us, and to ensure that we can align. Now, there's some really important decisions that the EU and applicant states are going to have to make on further enlargement of the EU in the future. And that's a matter for the EU and those countries. But we also have some common aims about, for example, improving governance or judicial systems or processes to tackle serious and organised crime, and that's going to be mutually of interest to the EU in terms of where they want to see those countries head, but also to us and to the United Kingdom. And so it's natural that we should be trying to come alongside and bring those efforts together. Obviously, on the current situation in Ukraine, it's absolutely crucial that we have that alignment, and you see that just in the last week with the horrific attacks we've been seeing all across Ukraine, and on the same night the British Council being hit by Putin's barbaric attacks at the same time as the EU delegation were attacked. So we're facing the same threats, and we need to be aligned in what we're doing to respond.
Thank you very much. Also, at the same time, that the EU institutions themselves have more of a limited role in security than, say, the member states or some other organisations. Could you say a bit more about what the E3 might be doing, or the GEF might be able to be doing on the back of these type of arrangements? Look,
as I said, I think you should see these all as mutually complementary. We continue to play a key role in the GEF, in the E3, in other groupings, and of course NATO is by foremost our primary security and defence relationship, and always will be. And you know that we have a NATO first policy as a government, and the investments that we're putting into defence and security more broadly. And of course the Minister of State at the MOD is going to be making a statement to the House later on today about defence industrial capability. But of course on that very issue there is an important linkage across, of course, to decisions that the EU is taking in relation to defence industrial capacity in Europe, and the importance of the discussions that we're having that are very live around the SAFE programme, but also around other capabilities and work that we're going to be doing together in the future. So I think these things are all mutually complementary for our security, and in the end we face the same geographic threats. We are seeing the same attempts to target and undermine our democracies, the same threats to our critical national infrastructure, the same challenges in terms of hostile state actors operating transnational repression. So it's crucial that we're speaking with the EU and sharing insights on this.
I'd like to ask about the Defence Procurement Programme, in particular Security Action for Europe. And we understand that the EU Commission set out just a few weeks ago in August some sort of timetable, or perhaps the draft terms for UK participation in SAFE. I wonder if you could say a few words, please, about the timetable.
Yeah, well, I think it's worth looking at the scale of this and why this was so crucial. And of course, having a security and defence partnership is a prerequisite to participation in SAFE for third countries. And obviously, it's a 150 billion euro instrument. It's very, very significant, and obviously that could lead to significant opportunities for our defence industries, not only boosting our capabilities, but also, of course, delivering jobs and investment here in the UK. And I think that's crucially important to understand at the start. There is obviously a process now, and as you say, our ambition is essentially to move this forward quite quickly, and we hope that therefore UK industry would then be able to participate in the first round of bids in November. But obviously this is a very, very live process. I'm not going to obviously comment on the discussions, because in the end, of course, we have to ensure there is value for money, that it meets our own strategic objectives as set out in the SDR. So I'm not going to commit to you before the committee today into any particular project or any particular spending or otherwise, because it's a very live discussion. But there is certainly a huge opportunity here to align, and that will contribute not only to our actual ability to defend Europe, but also crucially to generate jobs and new technologies, which is crucial.
Just to add to Stephen's point, I think the issue at the moment is, of course, the Commission has, we understand, proposed a mandate that's not yet approved by the European Council. Once that's happened, we can obviously enter into detailed negotiations. At the summit on 19th of May, when we signed the common understanding, the President of the Commission was actually very forward-leaning in terms of pressing forward on this. And there is As Stephen quite rightly says, there is a real opportunity here in terms of jobs in our defence sector up and down the country, and that is hugely important. But it's also important that we don't lose sight of the geostrategic imperatives that are here. This is not a moment to fragment European defence. We have a situation where Europe collectively is stepping up on its defence responsibilities. This government is obviously increasing defence spending and leading the way in that regard. But in addition to that, we have the return of war on our continent in Ukraine since Putin's illegal invasion back in 2022. So it is really important both economically and strategically, and that's why, just as Stephen says, there's that deadline of the first round, which I think is 30th of November from memory. It's also important.
And I think it's worth emphasising this is crucially important for the whole of the United Kingdom. It's 68%, I think, of defence spending goes with UK businesses outside of London and the South East. I mean, it's crucially important in South Wales, where both Nick and I represent. It's crucial in the North West. It's crucial in many, many locations. And it's also opening up new collaborations in areas where there'll be dual interests as well for defence and civil purposes. I was just with the space sector in Leicester discussing the importance of UK-EU cooperation in space technologies, which of course will have both defensive and civilian applications.
Can I just ask, I mean, you talk about the geostrategic imperative, and I think that's well understood. And you talk also about this in terms of jobs. But in that sort of strap line that you gave us at the beginning, Minister Thomas Symonds, around jobs, bills and borders, are you really capturing that sort of threat to the UK and to Europe when you're trying to sell this to the British people only in terms of jobs, bills and borders?
Probably not is the answer. I think I was just asked about a doorstep pitch. You don't get very long for your doorstep pitch.
You know that. At least we don't. I don't know about the returns.
Well, you can do it. I mean, I used to talk about this, which may, Richard, be to your point. I used to talk about security, safety, prosperity, which probably would then encompass a bit better the point you're making. But I think that there is though a really serious point here, which is that, of course, we have things that are going to be of tangible benefit. You know, look at what the supermarket said about the downward pressure on prices with the SBS agreement, what the energy sector has said, what the defence sector has said. It's really important we talk about those tangible, real benefits. But you're absolutely right. There is a much bigger point here. You know, that's when I was talking about the new strategic partnership. It really is about a moment where that return of war to our continent has really sent a message to all of us about how it's in our mutual interest to work together. And I think you're absolutely right. That is also, we should never lose sight of that when we're in this debate.
And of course, this goes beyond just the UK, EU and SAFE. Look at what we've just done with Norway. An incredible deal in terms of those frigates. That's going to be good for our security, but also good for jobs.
Just to go back to the timetable issue, if other if EU member states need to get their bids in by the end of November, is it the case that the UK is going to need to have an agreement with the EU by the 30th of November?
Well, as I said, we're trying to expedite that process at the moment. I don't want to give a sort of running commentary on where that's going, but there's certainly a shared ambition, I think, to move forward in this. But of course, it has to be on the right terms.
I mean, the van der Leyen said that she hoped that we have UK participation within a few weeks. Well, that's obviously not happened because she said that back in May. So something's holding it up. And we just wonder what
it's not been. There's not a particular delay. I wouldn't accept that. I think the EU, we very much respect the EU's internal processes. The Commission's proposed the mandate. It's for the Council to sign it off, and we are certainly as a government prepared for that deadline of the 30th of November, and we will be pushing forward. The reason we're obviously having, I'm sure the members of the committee would understand, this is a live negotiation in terms of participation. The security and defence partnership that we've already signed gives access in principle to the SAFE programme. So that's established. What isn't established and is subject to negotiation, which is why I'm treading carefully, is the terms upon which we participate. And that's the negotiation that's ongoing.
Right. Can I ask a very quick follow-up? Thank you. I appreciate you can't kind of make a commitment at this stage about the level of future funding, but can you clarify whether the UK has already made any payments in relation to the EU SAFE fund, and if so, how much and what?
No, it's not. There's not been payments so far. It's not established.
And just to reiterate again, any contributions will be absolutely assessed value for money and aligned with our strategic objectives. And that's
But there's been
discussion.
no promise of any payments or any made yet.
To my knowledge, no.
Made.
Thank you.
Emma, do you want to talk about youth mobility?
I'd love to.
Go
Thank
on
you,
then.
Chair. Thank you, Ministers, for being here. I'm also, I must declare, I'm on the UK-EU Parliamentary Partnership Assembly. And we were in Brussels earlier this year. Minister Thomas Simmons was there as well. We had a really great reception, I would say. They were pleased to see the Brits back at the table. And it was good to be on the front foot in Europe once again. So thank you for your work. Some people would say they haven't had a say in all this, and that is the young people in Britain. Brexit happened at a time where many of them weren't eligible to vote, and as such they lost loads of benefits that being part of the European Union brought with it. There's lots of talk about youth mobility and Erasmus+. How far apart are the UK and the EU on agreeing a youth mobility scheme? And have you seen the final EU negotiating position on the youth mobility scheme?
Well, firstly, can I just say something about the PPA, and just to thank you for your participation, but just to reassure cross-party colleagues around the table, not just myself, but the former EU negotiator, Lord Frost, was there as well, so you'd be pleased to hear there was a range of views being expressed in the PPA. But in all seriousness, it was really positive, and I think the PPA is a really important part of the architecture that we have in the UK-EU relationship at the moment. To your point as well around young people, I mean, I was struck about this very personally recently. My oldest daughter was picking up her GCSE results in the summer, and I was struck that a lot of that cohort, they would have been 8. At the time of the EU referendum, they're very, very different memories, and I'm always struck by that. And for me, I'm thinking about that cohort of young people and wanting to enhance the opportunities that they have where we are now in 2025, putting the Brexit battles of the past behind us, but how can we enhance their opportunities? And on the issue of the youth experience scheme, I actually think this will be a scheme that will bring very significant benefits to young British people who want to grow abroad, and the valuable form of cultural exchange. I think with regard to my earlier exchange with Sir John, I was talking about the cultural sector specifically then, but I also think this will be a group of young people that will be part of our soft power that go overseas. I've said, look, it's going to be a capped scheme. It'll be a scheme that will be in line with the existing. We've got 13 youth mobility schemes already, so there'll need to be visas. There won't be any ability to claim benefits and so on. But I think that sort of smart, controlled, capped youth experience scheme will be of economic benefit with young Europeans who will come here and contribute to our economy, but also a huge opportunity for young people across Britain. And I also want to make sure, and I'll just come to Erasmus Plus in a moment, that we make sure that this is a scheme that is open to everybody of whatever background, because I think that is hugely important. And I think we collectively, when this scheme is launched, I think members of Parliament have a particular role in this, actually, in terms of being able to say about the opportunities that are available for everyone, regardless of their economic background. On Erasmus Plus, we will firstly be learning from the existing schemes we have here in the UK, not just obviously the Turing scheme, but also the Tithe scheme in Wales, which I'm particularly interested in how well that has been working. We will, just as the exchange earlier that Stephen was having with AFRA around value for money, this is how we will approach association with Erasmus Plus. It will be done strictly on the basis of value for money. But I also observe as well that there is, again, a real value in our university sector as a source of soft power. And frankly, when I've been, I'm sure exactly the same for Stephen, when I've been going around to European capitals and indeed to Brussels preparing the negotiation, I'm forever struck by meeting people who studied or have been here in the United Kingdom and as a consequence have a starting favourable view, which I think, again, is a real strength for us on the international stage.
Absolutely, I agree. I mean, I've got 4 universities in my constituency, so I'm always banging the drum for the exchange of students and views and cultures, and but actually what it does for our soft power globally. You've talked about a cap. Is that hard cap on numbers the red line for the UK in the negotiations here on the mobility scheme?
There has to be a cap, and that we've been straightforward about that throughout. I always see, if you look at, I see this scheme in the context of the existing schemes we have. Again, I'm treading carefully because this is a live part of the ongoing negotiations. But we've got 13 youth mobility schemes at the moment. I think a number of them were signed by the previous government with a number of different countries. I see this working in that same way on the same basis. I think you were asking about the mandate. I think the EU has published, I think, its council decision on the opening of negotiations on a youth experience scheme. I'm obviously never going to see what the EU's ultimate bottom line is. That's not how negotiations work. But obviously, the EU wants to push forward with this, and as do we, because we want to see those opportunities for young Brits in place as soon as possible, for exactly the reason that you're saying around. We all, I think, want more opportunities for our young people.
Are you confident that we can get through these negotiations on the cap? Because I know the EU were very keen on pushing the youth mobility or exchange, or there's a difference in terms we're using. But do you think we can get through this?
I am an optimist in life, and I genuinely think that we can. And look, I always say about this that we came into government, I think we delivered the common understanding within 10 months, which wasn't bad going. So having had one experience of very intense negotiation, I am at least confident we can get there again, absolutely.
Thanks, Chair. Just following on Erasmus+, it was reported by the Financial Times last month that the Department for Education has put out a formal tender for an organisation now?
No, what will happen here is we're operating what I call a hub and spoke model in government. So obviously I sit at the hub in the Cabinet Office, and obviously I have to take the final decisions on the trade-offs and the negotiation. One, that has to happen in one place. But we rely upon, obviously, the expertise of the different departments. So, I haven't been familiar with that issue of the contract, but what is happening there is DFE will be preparing what the kind of things that they need to do to support me in the negotiations I will be doing to look at the association of Erasmus+. But I repeat the point that was made by Stephen earlier. We will do it if we believe that it represents value for money and it represents what is in our national interest. That's how we will explore it. But just as I've called it the ruthlessly pragmatic approach before. I take that very hard-headed approach to what is in our national interest. But I'm also very conscious, too, that national interest is also about opportunity. It's about opportunities for young people. And I think both the Youth Experience Scheme, which I know, Phil, you raised a number of times to me in questions in Parliament, that and indeed Erasmus, these are potential ways, absolutely, that can be a benefit to young people, I think.
Thank you. I had a couple of other questions for you, Paymaster General, on borders, which you mentioned in your opening remarks. So, as I understand it, the EU didn't agree to a formal returns mechanism on irregular migration in the Common Understanding back in May. And instead, what we've seen has been bilateral agreements, most notably the one-in, one-out agreement that has been struck with France over the summer, which is going through a pilot at the moment. And then, as the Secretary of the Germany All-Party Parliamentary Group, have been following closely reporting of a putative agreement similar to that with Germany. To what extent do discussions on an EU-wide scheme still feature in the negotiations?
So in terms of this, what we have in terms of UK plans is a pilot. And a pilot is what that means. If you pilot something and it is regarded as being successful in its objectives, then clearly it can be scaled up. That's what the nature of a pilot is. And the European Commission has given the green light to that pilot. So, it has that going forward. What we obviously want to do is to deal with the problem we all know about in terms of the small boats in the English Channel. People who are risking their lives in those tiny boats that we are seeing. Now, the government is looking and is using a wide range of measures. There is no silver bullet to deal with this issue, no single neat solution. It's a variety of things. And what I would say is that in addition to the work we've been doing on this pilot, which is to do with talks I and my officials have been having with the Commission, it's to do with bilateral work, really, which Stephen can come on to in a minute, that's been done at the Foreign Office. It's been a real team effort to get that over the line and maybe scaled up. But it's also, as well, what we're doing in terms of changing our domestic law. So, as you will know, with the Borders Bill and giving our law enforcement the same level of powers to tackle people smugglers that they have to tackle terrorists. That's obviously hugely important. The pledges we've made in terms of closing the asylum hotels in this Parliament, but also the work that, and Stephen can come on to this again, the bilateral work we do across Europe is hugely important in terms of smashing the gangs, because they work on an international basis. People who are smuggled come thousands and thousands of miles. I was having this discussion. Sofia is probably as far as you can get, I think, from here, and still be just about in the EU. And I'm having that same discussion, 1,200 miles away. But it's exactly the same issue. So regular migration, yes, very much part of the discussions, but it is also going to be about changes in our domestic law and the other international work we do as well. If you want to just come in on that, Steve.
Yeah, just to reassure the committee, this forms a core part of every bilateral conversation that we're having as well, and it will form part of some of those other fora that we're discussing issues in, whether that's in the EPC or whether, as I said, the Berlin process, particularly the Western Balkans countries and some of the Balkan routes that get used. This is a very, very core part of what we're doing. And the other thing I would highlight, of course, is there's a great deal of interest in our new sanctions regime, which is the first of its kind in the world, which has already designated a number of those who are involved in facilitating people smuggling and trafficking, and very much, again, coordination with the EU and indeed individual member states and non-EU member states can be crucial in identifying the key targets and nodes into the future about people we might take further action against. So I'm very confident that that kind of spirit of cooperation that we've got now is going to help us meet mutual objectives in terms of tackling not only those people who seek to shamefully exploit individuals in this way, but crucially ends up resulting in less people attempting to make those dangerous crossings to the UK.
Thank you for those responses. I just wanted to ask a question on Brexit border infrastructure as well. Yes, we've talked about SPS. Politico reported last month that the previous government spent £700 million on ports infrastructure after the UK left the EU. That's in addition to £120 million spent by UK ports, plus the National Audit Office's estimate of £711 million spent on inland infrastructure for customs and SPS checks, many of which currently lie empty, those facilities. That's more than £1.5 billion on infrastructure, much of which isn't being used at the moment. If the UK government does manage to agree an SPS deal over the coming years, what can be done to recover that cost so that it isn't simply written off? Is there any discussion that's being had?
Well, I just answering off the top of my head, I find it very difficult to see how we can recover much of that. I'm more than happy to take that back and have a discussion if any of that could be, of course. It's important value for money for taxpayers, but the reality is that the ruthlessly pragmatic approach we've taken on the SPS means that we don't need those import checks. That's why we've said we don't need to implement those import checks. That's why we've delayed it so we can get the SPS agreement into place. And what this government is about is freer trade. We're about taking away barriers to trade. That's what this government is seeking to do. So we don't have to spend money like that on additional border infrastructure. And we can save businesses money, whether it's on the identity checks, the sampling checks, the export health certificates that we can sweep away. I should also add as well, I don't want to open up a new line of debate, Chair, but I should comment as well that the SPS agreement will have a really positive impact on the Irish Sea and trade across the Irish Sea. Now, of course, we are a good faith actor on the international stage. If we've signed agreements, we stick to them. And it doesn't matter whether it was signed by us or signed by a previous government. That's the view we take. That means we will continue to implement the Windsor framework now. That's why we've just implemented the phase 3 checks on 1st of July. But we can get to a stage where we can significantly reduce those checks on the Irish Sea as well, which I think can only be a positive thing.
I'm going to move on to Alex.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask a bit more about the role of the FCDO. So, of course, really important to have these agreements, the mechanisms, the dialogues. But as the Chair said at the start, a measure of success will be how people in the EU feel about the EU reset and how they feel towards the UK as a whole. So could you tell us a bit more about the public diplomacy FCDO is doing and how successful that's being or otherwise?
In terms of individual relationships with individual EU member states or other European
populations.
Populations.
The people in the EU. How are they feeling about us? And tell us about the good work you've done to...
I mean, I haven't got a detailed...
Can you do it shortly?
Yeah. I haven't got a detailed table of polling. But look, I can genuinely say, and this is anecdote, but the response that we've had from governments and indeed in all of my engagements on different visits has been incredibly positive. They see the UK as a key partner. They understand that we've left the EU and that we're not returning, but they want to have a new modern partnership that responds to the quite dramatically changed world that we've seen since, of course, the Brexit referendum. So, and I think particularly in that kind of security and defence space, they see us as a key partner, either as a strong military power, but also having unique expertise and reach, and of course our transatlantic special relationship as well. I think that they are very keen to see increased trading. This is mutually beneficial, and also crucially, I think they see increasingly the UK as a great destination to invest in. I think particularly of my visit to Spain, even before we reached the political agreement on Gibraltar and new agreements with Spain that we entered into last week. And I visited Iberdrola, which of course is a massive renewable energy investor, investing billions in renewable energy generation in the UK and jobs, and particularly in Scotland. Fantastic. And they were absolutely clear. They have a vote of confidence in the UK and our investment and economic environment. That is even more strengthened now by what happened last week, and meeting with Spanish businesses, with the Chancellor and the then Business Secretary last week. It was clear that they just see opportunity after opportunity for mutual investment in both directions. And so that is a tangible result of us doing the new relationship with the EU on the 19th of May, but also as a result of our new relationship with Spain. So I think there are huge opportunities here, and it's a genuinely positive environment to work within.
Brilliant. I mean, that's really good to hear. At the same time, we're looking at the headcount reduction in FCDO. So I wondered if you've done an impact on how that's going to affect Europe as a whole, and maybe the UK mission in Brussels and the impact that might have.
We were told it was going to be between 15 and 25%.
Yes, I mean, look, I don't want to sort of prejudge, obviously, ongoing consultation processes. You'll understand the importance that those are done appropriately with staff and trade unions and others. It is right that we are looking to remove some of the top-heavy nature of the FCDO and to focus resources more actually on both doing diplomacy overseas, but also ensuring that we've got a lean and fit-for-purpose structure within the organisation, and that's why the decisions that are currently in train are being made. And I certainly want to see empowered individuals both across the network in Europe, but also within HQ as well. And I want to see more people out there banging the drum for Britain. Banging the drum for deals, for growth, for new security arrangements, for people-to-people contacts. And I've been incredibly impressed by the teams that I've met in our embassies and missions, including in Brussels. And Nick and I have worked with them very, very closely. They're brilliant. But that doesn't mean you don't need to change and improve and reform. And I think one thing I can be absolutely assured the committee on is that Europe remains one of our key focus points for the FCDO for all the very obvious reasons. The benefits of that relationship for the UK.
We've gone to Afra.
Yes, thank you. On Gibraltar, which we mentioned just before, the FCDO announced a political agreement for a new treaty with the EU, but we haven't seen any of the detail of that yet. So I just wanted to find out when we're likely to see the final treaty and whether there are any significant issues of contention remaining.
No, hopefully imminently. We're working at pace to get the final treaty text agreed, and then it can go into its relevant processes. But that political agreement that we reached between the UK and the EU and with Spain, with Gibraltar, I think was highly significant. It was historic, and it's genuinely been welcomed across the piece and has had much wider benefits, even beyond the immediate benefits. And I think crucially to understand is that this was backed absolutely by the government of Gibraltar. We were clear as the UK that we would not enter into any agreement that impinged on their sovereignty or their rights, or which they were not comfortable with, and that's exactly what we said at the start, as well as maintaining our military capabilities, and that's what we've stuck to. And I think when you see the detail of the treaty, that will be very, very clear. And I really actually want to pay tribute to not only the government of Gibraltar but also our partners in the EU and in Spain, again, for the spirit in which they have undertaken the discussions. And I think it really genuinely opens up a new period of partnership, which is going to be benefit not only to the region and for Gibraltarians, but actually for the wider UK-Spanish and indeed the wider UK-EU relationship. And that was very apparent in the talks last week in Downing Street. I'll be visiting Gibraltar this week, and I'm in regular contact with the Chief Minister. I'm in regular contact with my Spanish counterparts. I saw Foreign Minister Alvarez in Denmark, and I can say that it's a very positive step. And we all agree it's in all of our interests to get that detail of the treaty agreed as quickly as possible and get that out there for proper scrutiny.
You mentioned Gibraltar's sovereignty, obviously, and back in June, the previous Foreign Secretary, when he gave an update on the agreement, he said in his statement to the House that a clause explicitly protecting sovereignty would be inserted. I just wondered if you could give us a bit more detail about that clause.
I don't want to prejudge the treaty being out there, but there were important guarantees made. But I think the really crucial point to understand here is that the sovereignty of Gibraltar was never on the table in these negotiations. This is very much about the technical arrangements that govern the relationship with the EU, trade across the border, individuals passing the border, the operations of the airport, all of these things. And we have absolutely agreed a deal that does not cross up the red lines that we set out at the start. And that was one of the first changes we made to the text when we came into office.
So is there going to be a sovereignty clause?
Well, there's a relevant clause which you will see when that comes out, but I can absolutely assure you that in no way impinges on the sovereignty of Gibraltar, and the Gibraltarian government are absolutely clear on this. I can assure you that they would not have agreed to this agreement if they felt that it was.
Thank you. And I have to say, we met representatives of the Gibraltar government 9 or 10 months ago, and we were struck by how very optimistic they were. We weren't at all sure they were being realistic, but they seem to have been right. That there seems to have been able to be the sort of deal they were looking for.
Like Nick, I was an optimist, and there genuinely was a spirit of cooperation and a recognition that this is good for the economy in Gibraltar and Andalusia. It's good for the UK-Spanish relationship. It's good for our wider relationship, and ultimately, it doesn't cross any of those red lines that we set, either as the UK or that Gibraltar set.
So, can I ask you about this, which is about scrutiny? So for free trade agreements, the government has said it's going to publish the finalised treaties well before CRAG commences to allow time for committee scrutiny. So what we want to ask you today is, will you also commit to making the text of any new treaties with the EU available for longer than the CRAG process requires in order to ensure proper scrutiny?
So, look, first of all, I welcome scrutiny. And one of the things I've discovered in this role, given how multifaceted it is the number of select committees of both houses I find myself before, which is quite a range, I have to say. But a delight, Chair, to be joining your committee here as well today. And obviously, whether it's in terms of parliamentary questions, statements, as you'd expect, the usual run. But you're quite right to challenge me on the CRAG process. Now, obviously, what I can't anticipate at the moment in terms of, whether it's on the SPS, whether it's on the, the emissions trading system linkage or the different aspects we're driving forward, what precise form the final agreement's going to take. But we're obviously very conscious of the CRAG process, and where the CRAG process is appropriately engaged, we will obviously follow it. We will obviously as well, as you know, Chair, as part of that process, provision to the relevant select committee. So wherever that is appropriately engaged on the form of the agreement that we reach, we will certainly do that. And I am keen to be, and always have been, as open as possible with the agreements. Obviously, the negotiations are conducted in a different way, as you would expect. I do and have You've given speeches over the past 14 months about direction, but there has to be, to get the best result from a negotiation, you do need that trust and confidentiality, particularly in the final weeks. But at the same time, when we signed the Common Understanding and the Security and Defence Partnership, they were published on the same day. So I am keen for as much transparency as possible, and indeed very respectful of the CRAG process. Well, it goes back to the Ponsonby Rule of 1924.
Oh, don't talk to me
I
about
would not
Ponsonby
want
Rule.
to.
I mean, it's honestly, it's so out of date. The whole thing is so out of date. But given what we have, and this is what we have, I just want to make sure that this out of date rule
the point is
used
taken
as best
very well.
it can.
Taken very well.
And even when you're negotiating, you can say, we won't get this. The Parliament won't like this. And if we're actually able to be engaged and be able to hold to account, we just think that the negotiations would be better, the agreements would be better, and it is our job as parliamentarians to scrutinise.
Listen, I would entirely agree about your job to scrutinise. I'm a huge respecter of Parliament. I've always loved Parliament and come to be held to account. I think on these negotiations, it is a question of balance. I think you're absolutely right to say that you can say, look at the pressure in Parliament about X, Y, Z. That's of course that can be helpful, but also, and this is my experience of the 10 months of delivering the Common Understanding, you do have to have between the negotiating teams trust, and you do need that space as well alongside the public-facing aspects of it, and it's getting that balance right. I think that's important.
I think the other thing is that given the use of the exceptional cases provision.
It's on UK-France, is it?
Yeah. That took place over the summer. Do you envisage relying on that again in the near future?
Well, I'll let Stephen come in on UK-France, because obviously there's very particular circumstances to do with that treaty.
No, I understand that, but we just, it's a one way of expediting the process,
do I envisage,
but we'd rather it didn't happen.
Do I envisage relying on it? Well, I don't anticipate it, but I can't say 100%, obviously, because I don't know particular urgent situations that might arise, and given the context of that treaty was in irregular migration. But I hope you'll take it from the tenor of my answer that my general tendency is towards transparency and scrutiny, simply because I think it improves things.
Do you think it would be a good idea, if it's anticipated that the exceptional cases provision is going to be used, that at the very least those whose job it is to scrutinise are told in advance that that's what you're going to do?
In any such circumstance, I will bear in mind the position of the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee.
Good. That's what I wanted to hear.
I totally agree with what Nick said, Chair, and the respect I have for this committee and also for Parliament, and appeared in relation to other treaties, and will be appearing, I'm sure, in due course on others. But even despite that exceptional procedure, you'll know, of course, that there was still an explanatory memorandum that was provided and a statutory statement on Section 22 procedure. So we did even take steps in that exceptional circumstance to try and keep people informed, and would always seek to do that.
Just asking about when you published the explanatory memorandum, because we were waiting for it when we came back, and
my understanding was that it was even during the recess. I'll find out for the exact date it was provided. Yeah, so okay. I can make sure we get you a list of the dates,
because we thought it would be published when we came back, and so we've been looking for it. Okay, good. Can I move on to John?
Thank you. Can I turn to dynamic alignment? Now, behind that rather technical sounding phrase, what it actually means is, for those of us who supported taking back control, it's actually giving control away again, because we are now going to be required to accept EU laws which are decided upon without our having a vote or any influence. Now, I understand there will be some kind of ability of the UK to, quote, decision shape. Can you just say what influence we will actually have in practice over new EU laws which we are going to be required to abide by?
I'll just first of all challenge the premise of your question. Far from giving away control, this government is exercising control, and indeed exercising control on the independent trade policy. Let's just give an example. In the same month, we secured an FTA with India. To be fair, Boris Johnson, previous Prime Minister, promised one by Diwali. He didn't say which Diwali, in fairness. But nonetheless, that was secured. We then secured an economic deal with the United States. And then we secured the Common Understanding with the European Union, all in the space of a few 4 weeks. And so, John, I remember you very well arguing for an independent trade policy, and there you have it, exercised in our national interest, not just with the EU, but with different countries around the world as well. That is exercising control and exercising sovereignty. Similarly, in terms of the SPS agreement, which you very fairly challenged me on, first of all, the government has a mandate to get that agreement. That is what was in our 2024 manifesto. I remember it well. I drafted the page in the manifesto. So it is there. We have a democratic mandate to secure the SPS agreement. And we also, as part of that mandate, promised that we would not rejoin the customs union. We're not. In fact, we're securing trade deals. We wouldn't go back to single market. We're not. And we wouldn't go back to freedom of movement. We're not. So the framework and the respect to the decision that was taken in 2016, I would say, is embodied in our manifesto, and indeed the steps that we are taking to build a new strategic partnership as a democratic mandate from last year. Now, in terms of how this works, we are taking a decision as a high standards jurisdiction to align with another high standards jurisdiction. That's our decision to do, and Parliament, and I'm sure you, Sir John, will have your say when we bring the legislation to Parliament. I would be expecting to do that next year, certainly to meet the deadline of implementing by 2027. I'm sure you'll get every opportunity to speak. I'm sure we'll have a few exchanges about this when we take that particular legislation through Parliament. But that is our choice. There will be some carve-outs, and again, I won't delve into ongoing negotiation. But if you look at the common understanding, it's clear that there are going to be some things that we are going to want to carve out from it. That, again, is our sovereign choice to do so. We will then, the rule shaping, what does that mean? It means being in the room when we're talking about things like new directives or new regulations. But also as well, and this is the point I would make around this, there will then be, we do not go into any trade agreement wanting disputes. Of course you don't. But any free trade agreement you wish to enter into around the world is going to have some form of independent dispute resolution mechanism. Of course it is. And they are going to require the two participating parties to accept a set of common rules. And the arbitration mechanism we have here, yes, as I indicated, I think, towards the opening, the European Court of Justice role is with regard to the interpretation of European law. It is not to do with the overall decision in the dispute. So that, in my view, is fair, reasonable, balanced. And if we do wish to enter into more FTAs, and that I generally think that's a positive thing to be doing, you do have to agree to have that common set of rules.
I'm all in favour of FTAs too, but FTAs don't include the provision whereby we have to obey the laws passed in another place over which we have no influence. That's the difference with what is now proposed for the EU. Are you suggesting that if the EU passes a law which we don't agree with, we have an ability not to implement it if it is part of the arrangements for dynamic alignment?
Well, this government we will sign up, and this is our sovereign choice to do so, to align on those standards. I mean, look, in terms of, to go back for a minute to you asked me specifically about the rule shaping, and as I said, it's participatory. We also, you'll have, access things like to data and being able to participate in discussion around the development of the rules. But I'm not saying or being defensive about this. We are taking a decision as a government to align with another high standards jurisdiction. That's our sovereign choice to do so. It is not undermining our sovereign ability to strike other free trade deals if we want to. Of course, the EU deal is very particular. Why? Because we've got over £800 billion worth of trade, and we have decades where we were a member state. We're not anymore. We're not proposing to change that status. In fact, we're very respectful, as I've said, about single market customs union, freedom of movement. But we are taking that decision because it is in our national economic interest to do it. And it's fine if people, it's a perfectly reasonable position. If people don't want to support our SPS agreement, of course they don't have to. But they will have to explain to businesses in 18 months, 2 years' time, where they want to reimpose all these costs upon them. They want them to pay for export health certificates, pay for identity checks, pay for sampling. They'd have to build all the border infrastructure that Phil referred to earlier. And they will have to tell people why it is they want to put upward pressure on prices in supermarkets. Now, if people want to have that debate, that's fine, but that will be the consequence of that position.
I mean, you are suggesting that a lot of the benefits which we've spent some time talking about earlier this afternoon in making travel easier and cooperation, actually the price of that is that we do accept some degree of control again from the European Union in the imposition of laws through dynamic alignment.
It's not a price, it's an economic benefit, and it's a strong economic benefit. And if there is look, you're perfectly reasonable to put that argument, but you have to front up about the consequences of it in terms of costs to businesses and costs to consumers on the price of food and drink. Now, I welcome that debate. I gave a speech only a couple of weeks ago at The Spectator where I said I would welcome that debate, and I certainly would. And I want to get the SPS agreement into place as soon as possible. And if people wish to then make the case that they want to push up the price of food and they want to put all this border infrastructure in place, I would look forward to the debate.
Okay, can I just ask you one other aspect? You referred earlier your respect for Parliament. Can you just say a bit more about how Parliament is going to have a say over this? I think it is suggested there will be primary legislation, but that will give powers to ministers to introduce the individual alignments through secondary legislation, in other words, statutory instruments. Is that correct?
So we're obviously going to now negotiate the legal text, but the general framework, first of all, yes, we're going to need legislation. I've said that before. I think I said it in an earlier answer, Sir John. And I think that is absolutely critical that we do that. And again, I will welcome that debate when we come to it to take that through Parliament. Clearly, there's a bit of the negotiation to go in the sense of the carve-outs that I mentioned that will need to be, that's a live discussion, will need to be dealt with. Then we will have that piece of legislation. You are then right, there needs to be a mechanism by which Parliament has that role. Because we haven't yet finalised the legal text, which is why I'm probably slightly more cautious in the answer than you might want me to be. But certainly the role of Parliament is hugely important. And the one thing I was insistent upon with the EU is that we show mutual respect for each other's processes. I mean, I very much do that in terms of the EU. I mean, we've been talking about the relationship between the Commission and the Council in some of my previous answers. But equally, that respect is there for our procedures in Parliament. But I make no apology for the decision we are taking to align with another high standards jurisdiction and the economic benefits it will bring.
And Phil, you got the last question.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to the comments you made at the start, Paymaster General, about jobs. I visited over the summer a local trailer manufacturer business in my Bolton West constituency, and they were telling me on conformity of assessment and conformity of production, they have to manufacture to 3 different regulatory regimes for the GB market, the Northern Ireland market, and the EU market. And that, in practice, means that they're having to incur an extra £120,000 of cost per annum, and they're having to employ a member of staff to complete paperwork for 3 different regulatory regimes that achieve the same outcome. Now, as I understand it, conformity of assessment, conformity of production for that sector are not in scope of the dynamic alignment points that were mentioned by Sir John in the common understanding. What message would you have for that business in my constituency?
My message to that business is probably the same as I give to a number of different sectors. I mean, I think what you're referring to is this issue around mutual recognition of conformity assessment. Is that one of the reasons we have this annual summit process is for businesses, exactly like the trailer business, Phil, you've referred to in your constituency, to be able to feed in issues that they have, issues that they think would make their business easier, that would reduce costs and red tape on their businesses. And I would say generally, I mean, I had a exchange with Sir John earlier around the touring artist is another good example of something that we need to feed into future summits. And that's why I think that ongoing process is so important, so issues like that can be raised and aired.
And very tangibly, I mean, going back to what Nick was saying before, it is fundamentally about the costs that are being saved as well by what we've already agreed, but listening to businesses about the future. I mean, that issue of the export health certificates, and this applies to the fishing industry, of course, and shellfish industry too, save £200 per consignment each time goods are sent, because we don't have to have the export health certificates. So if you had a mixed lorry, for example, with lots of different products in it, that's potentially saving thousands of pounds every single time, right? That is a direct benefit to business and to jobs here in the UK. And those who want to take more ideological approaches to this are going to have to explain why they would want to impose those costs on businesses and jobs in the UK. So this is about making things work and improving the circumstances for businesses here.
Thank you very much. That concludes our session on UK-EU reset this afternoon. I'd like to thank the witnesses for joining us today. Keep going and look forward to seeing you again soon.
And thank you all very much. Thank you for a very good and well-natured session. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.